Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The office of Abbott Cosmetics was a pressure cooker, the pressure in the air nearly palpable, as if every polished face and satiny glass wall could amplify the stress expiring from its inhabitants. Jack Abbott sat behind his massive mahogany office, his hands gripped so tightly that his knuckles had turned white, and every muscle in his body buckled with a slightly contained fury. The events of the once 24 hours had unfolded like an agony he couldn't wake from, and the words he just eavesdropped replayed constantly in his mind, echoing like a minatory shower he could neither ignore nor suppress. The secret that had been rumored, though not meant for his cognizance, was further than just a treason. It was an poke to everything he'd erected, a challenge to his authority, and a particular crack that dug into the veritably gist of his pride. The fact that it came from someone he'd trusted, someone who had participated not only the boardroom with him but in numerous late nights strategizing the future of Abbott, made it unsupportable. The counter-accusations were disastrous if this secret were to come public. The company he'd nurtured, the conglomerate he'd fought to maintain against rivals and family likewise, would teeter on the point of disaster. Jack felt his palpitation forging in his tabernacles as his mind contended through every possible script. He imagined the captions, the whispers in the hallways, the legal ramifications, and worst of all the particular backstabbings. His fritters rapped against the face of his office, a metrical beat born from nervous energy and growing rage, while his eyes scrutinized the room as if the walls themselves might offer some sapience or escape. The adjunct who had delivered routine memos just moments ago sounded unconscious to the storm brewing behind the glass, and the other director scuffled papers and changed awkward ganders, seeing that commodity monumental was unfolding but not yet understanding the depth of the impending explosion. Jack's aspect settled on the framed photos lining the shelves, images of family, of moments he cherished, of palms hard-won in the boardroom and in the public eye, and for a brief second, he allowed himself the bitter taste of nostalgia. Those palms still now sounded fragile, concave echoes in the face of the disclosure he just eavesdropped. The treason cut through his sense of invincibility, leaving him raw and exposed. Every instinct screamed at him to act, to defy, to demand responsibility, but every rational study reminded him that any rash move could further hazard the delicate balance he'd maintained between business and particular fidelity. The Abbott services, generally a sanctuary of perfection and order, now felt like a pin ending in. The familiar hum of computers, the soft clatter of keyboards, and the distant chatter of workers had converted into a bow-wow that heightened his anxiety. The walls sounded to press inward, the air thick with implied pressure, and Jack's casket felt tight, as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders alone. He imagined calling in the board members, orchestrating exigency meetings, casting statements, and initiating damage control, but the study only made the wrathfulness swell briskly. Every fiber of his being wanted retaliation, yet he understood with excruciating clarity that timing was everything. Acting too snappily could expose his vulnerabilities. Acting too sluggishly could allow the treason to metastasize into a commercial cancer. He gripped his jaw so hard it hurt, wishing he could conduct his fury into an armament sharp enough to strike with perfection, to slice through deception and reveal the verity in one decisive move. Recollections of his nonage, of battles fought with siblings over control, of alliances formed and broken in the name of family fidelity, came crashing back with a grim force. He flashed back the long nights negotiating contracts, the backroom deals that had erected Abbott from a modest enterprise into a hustler of cosmetics and invention. He flashed back the offerings, the particular moments missed, the Gemütlichkeit strained, all in pursuit of excellence and dominance in an assiduity that admired neither mercy nor sentiment. And yet, despite all that, despite his careful planning and scrupulous oversight, a single secret had the power to unravel it all. The magnitude of it was nearly too important to bear, the consummation that trust was both his most precious asset and his most dangerous vulnerability. His mind spun with possibilities, calculating consequences, assessing pitfalls, imagining backstabbings he hadn't yet uncovered, and wondering which abettors might be intimately working against him. Every script sounded worse than the last, and he could feel the tight coil of rage and fear inside him stretching to the breaking point. Outside his office, The world carried on with deceptive normality. The elevator resounded, the lobby doors swished open and unrestricted, and the hum of the megacity beyond Jabot's glass walls was a stark discrepancy to the chaos consuming Jack's studies. The contradiction of normality outside and fermentation within heightened his sense of insulation, leaving him feeling as though he were standing at the eye of a hurricane that could annihilate everything in moments. He imagined walking through the halls, defying those involved, hearing denials, seeing guilt in the eyes of those who had wronged him. The particular and professional lines blurred fully. It was insolvable to separate business strategy from the treason of those he considered family. The weight of anticipation, the need to maintain appearances while intimately scuffling with profound hurt, pressed down on him relentlessly. Every decision now carried monumental consequences, and the consummation that one wrong move could collapse both his character and Jabot's standing in the commercial world kept him on edge. The storm inside Jack was imaged in every corner of Jabot. Documents piled neatly on divisions now sounded like implicit munitions, alliances felt fragile and unreliable, and every discussion, every casual comment, every smile or moo, sounded loaded with retired meaning. Jack felt like a general preparing for battle, except the battleground was unnoticeable, the adversaries hidden, and the outgrowth uncertain. He considered strategies, imagined competitions, rehearsed speeches, and counted every possible response from abettors and adversaries likewise. Wrathfulness, hurt, fear, and determination swirled in a dizzying, nearly paralyzing whirlpool, leaving him contemporaneously overwhelmed and hyperactive focused. He realized that control had always been in vision, and now further than ever, the delicate facade he maintained in public was in peril of worsening, revealing raw, mortal vulnerability underneath. Hours passed like days as Jack's mind worked lifelessly, conniving, calculating, and anticipating. His vision narrowed on results, on damage control, on way to recapture equilibrium and restore order, but the emotional risk was immense. Sweat formed at his tabernacles, his hands quivered slightly, and the pressure etched itself into his face, leaving deep crimps that imaged the intensity of the internal battle. The knowledge of the secret he'd eavesdropped, the understanding of its consequences, and the necessity of navigating this unfaithful moment with a combination of cunning, restraint, and force, created a whirlpool that hovered to consume him entirely. In the quiet moments when he might eventually breathe, the magnitude of what he was facing came crashing back, reminding him that Jabot, his heritage, and indeed his veritably sense of identity hung precariously in the balance. By the time evening fell over Genoa City, the office had voided except for Jack. The lights cast long murk across the walls, and the megacity skyline lustered through the bottom-to-ceiling windows, a cold wave indifferent substantiation to his struggle. He sat back, rubbing his eyes, knowing that the battle was far from over. Every supporter demanded careful consideration, every move had to be calculated with ruthless perfection, and every secret had the implicit to enkindle farther chaos. The weight of the world rested on his shoulders, but beneath it all was a stubborn, unyielding determination. Jack Abbott had faced treason, deception, and commercial warfare before, but no way like this. This time the stakes were advanced, the consequences more particular, and the path forward fraught with pitfall. The storm inside him hadn't yet passed. It was only gathering instigation, preparing to unleash a total meltdown that would shake Jabot, his family, and Genoa City itself to its veritably foundations. As the night strengthened and Genoa City's skyline glowed like a silent jury outside the towering windows of Jabot, Jack remained alone, the weight of everything pressing harder with every end nanosecond. The secret he'd eavesdropped refused to loosen its grip on his mind, shifting from shock into preoccupation, from unbelief into a sharp certainty that commodity rotten had taken root at the core of his company. He replayed the moment over and over, the meter of hushed voices carried through the corridor, the careless supposition that sequestration still was in a structure riddled with ambition and treason. That single lapse had cracked open a verity so dangerous it hovered to swallow decades of careful leadership, and Jack could feel the familiar sense of control he'd always reckoned upon slipping through his fritters. His reflection in the darkened glass slightly recalled the man he formerly knew, the confident superintendent replaced by someone hardened, restless, and visibly rasping at the edges, a man standing on the point of a breakdown he could neither stop nor completely understand. By morning, the atmosphere at Jabot shifted noticeably, as if the structure itself tasted the coming storm. Workers moved cautiously, exchanges failed suddenly when Jack passed, and indeed the most seasoned directors plotted to maintain their usual countenance. Jack noticed everything, every nervous regard, every delayed response, every half-verity hidden behind commercial amenities. Paranoia stoned his instincts, transubstantiating minor irregularities into implicit pitfalls. Financial reports that formerly brought consolation now felt like enciphered warnings, protrusions suddenly suspect, and hookups he'd formerly supported now felt tainted by unseen dockets. The secret hadn't only undermined his trust in others, it had compromised his trust in the system he erected, the mechanisms that formerly guaranteed order and responsibility. Jabot was no longer just a company under pressure. It was a battleground, and Jack was no longer certain who stood beside him, or who awaited patiently for his downfall. The deeper he dug, the further unsettling the geography came. Paper trails suggested at opinions made without his knowledge, strategic shifts enforced under the guise of invention but aligned distrustfully with rival interests. Jack's mind contended to connect the blotches, each disclosure buttressing the idea that the treason wasn't insulated but systemic. He felt wrathfulness rise again, not explosive this time but cold and calculating, the kind that burned sluggishly and consumed everything in its path. This wasn't simply a particular poke. It was a coordinated assault on his authority, his heritage, and the values Jabot had claimed to uphold. The consummation that someone had been maneuvering in the murk while smiling to his face was ruinous, a memorial that power infrequently eroded loudly but rather dissolved still, one compromised decision at a time. Jack's physical state began to image the chaos consuming him. Sleep came fugitive, his body restless indeed when prostration prayed for relief. Coffee replaced reflections, stress etched deeper lines into his face, and the formerly royal confidence in his stride gave way to pressure and stiffness. The structure that had formerly amped him now felt stifling, every hallway echoing with the possibility of discovery or disaster. His temper docked, tolerance eroded, and moments of clarity were decreasingly intruded by flashes of rage he plotted to contain. He knew others noticed, that whispers followed him just as relentlessly as his own studies did, but pride averted him from decelerating down. Admitting vulnerability felt like rendition, and rendition wasn't an option. Not when Jabot's future hung in the balance. As days passed, pressure mounted from every direction. Board members began asking sharper questions, investors demanded solace, and challengers circled like predators seeing weakness. Jack responded with practiced authority, delivering polished explanations and confident protrusions, but beneath the face, his resoluteness cracked a little further with each commerce. The secret impended over every discussion, an implied verity that hovered to erupt at any moment. He felt trapped between exposure and silence, knowing that revealing the verity could spark chaos, while concealing it allowed the spoilage to spread unbounded. Every choice sounded disastrous, every path leading to loss. The burden of leadership had no way felt heavier, and the insulation that accompanied it came unsupportable. Recollections resurfaced unasked, reminding Jack of once failures, of moments when he undervalued the cost of trust or overrated the fidelity of those closest to him. He flashed back before battles for control, family fractures that no way completely healed, and compromises he formerly justified as necessary for survival. Those ghosts visited him now, brooding that history was repeating itself, that he was formerly again standing at the edge of a familiar ocean. The difference this time was the scale. Jabot was bigger, the stakes advanced, and the fallout potentially unrecoverable. Jack questioned whether his grim pursuit of dominance had dazed him to advising signs, whether his confidence had sluggishly morphed into complacency. The consummation cut deeply, striking at the core of his identity as a leader. The siege on Jabot boosted still but relentlessly. Leaks appeared in the press, subtle at first, also decreasingly pointed. Rumors of internal insecurity circulated, casting mistrustfulness on the company's future, and shaking investor confidence. Jack honored the strategy incontinently, the slow corrosion of credibility designed to weaken Jabot from within before delivering a final blow. The secret he carried felt heavier now, not just a particular burden but a ticking time lemon. He understood that someone wanted him destabilized, second-guessing himself, insulated and reactive rather than decisive. And despite his sweats to stay ahead, He could feel himself slipping into exactly that trap. Jack's connections suffered alongside his unraveling. Long-standing alliances grew strained as trust dissolved into dubitation. Every probative gesture felt performative, every concern potentially manipulative. He set up himself retreating inward, guarding his studies fiercely, unintentional to partake indeed fractions of his fears. This insulation only magnified the pressure, leaving him alone with his twisting studies and mounting dread. The company demanded strength, resoluteness, and clarity, yet Jack felt decreasingly fractured, pulled in opposing directions by duty, pride, and the creepy knowledge that everything he erected could collapse under the weight of a single verity. The breaking point came not with a dramatic disclosure but with the accretive risk of grim stress. One autumn, girdled by fiscal reports and strategic protrusions, Jack felt commodity inside him snap. His breath came shallow, his hands shook uncontrollably, and the walls sounded to close in as the enormity of his situation eventually overwhelmed him. Times of restraint, of suppressing mistrustfulness and fear in the name of leadership, erupted all at formerly. He realized with astounding clarity that he was losing control, not just of Jabot but of himself. The acknowledgement scarified him, yet it also sparked a flicker of determination. Collapse wasn't an option, not now, not ever however. Also he'd fight it on his own terms. Indeed, if it meant embracing a ruthlessness he'd long tried to avoid, if this was a war. That resoluteness still came at a cost. Jack hardened, getting more aggressive in his opinions, lower tolerant of dissent, more willing to bulldoze opposition. The metamorphosis was conspicuous, unsettling indeed to those oriented to his intensity. Jabot began to reflect his inner fermentation, the formerly cohesive association now fractured by fear, ambition, and query. Workers tasted the shift, productivity suffered, and the culture Jack formerly supported eroded under the weight of extremity operation and power struggles. The siege was no longer external. It had traduced the walls, infecting every department, every decision, every commerce. Despite the chaos, Jack cleaved fiercely to the belief that he could still turn the drift. He poured himself into strategy sessions, late-night planning, and grim analysis, induced that if he just worked harder, pushed further, and overreached his adversaries, he could reclaim control. Yet the harder he fought, the clearer it came that the battle wasn't just commercial but deeply particular. The secret had exposed vulnerabilities he'd long denied, forcing him to defy uncomfortable trueness about leadership, fidelity, and the cost of ambition. Jabot was under siege, yes, but so was Jack Abbott's sense of tone. As the weeks dragged on, the pressure reached a fever pitch. Every advertisement, every request change, every internal memo carried amplified significance. Jack lived in a constant state of alert, bracing for impact, staying for the ineluctable moment when the secret would surface and everything would change. The expectation was torture, a slow burn that hovered to consume him entirely. Yet beneath the prostration and fear, a stubborn adaptability remained. Jack had survived worse, endured backstabbings that would have destroyed lower men, and surfaced stronger. Whether that strength would be enough this time remained uncertain. By the time the coming extremity impended on the horizon, Jack stood at a crossroads, his heritage hanging in the balance. Jabot was no longer just a company fighting external pitfalls. It was a reflection of its leader's internal war. The secret still lurked in the murk, staying for the right moment to strike, and Jack knew that when it did, there would be no turning back. Total meltdown was no longer a possibility, it was ineluctable. The only question left was whether Jack Abbott would crop from the wreckage as a survivor or come another casualty of the veritably conglomerate he'd erected. The final cracks began to show in ways Jack could no longer hide. His countenance slipped during routine meetings, his focus fractured by the grim mindfulness that every face around the table might belong to an adversary. The pressure of maintaining control while suppressing fear came unsupportable, and the insulation he'd assessed on himself only magnified the sense of brewing collapse. Jabot no longer felt like a heritage worth guarding but a trap ending in on him from every side, demanding immolation after immolation with no guarantee of survival. The secret dallied like a shadow behind every decision, poisoning his judgment and feeding his growing paranoia. Indeed, moments of apparent stability felt deceptive, fragile visions that could shatter without warning. Jack understood now that the siege had formerly succeeded in one pivotal way, It had broken his certainty. No strategy could undo that damage. As he goggled out over the megacity, formerly more prostration importing heavy on his shoulders, he realized the true peril wasn't the secret itself, but what it had turned him into, a leader driven by fear rather than vision. And with that consummation came the nipping verity that Jabot's topmost trouble was no longer outside its walls, but seated at the veritably top, unraveling in silence.